Hi, everyone. So I work with the Federal Treasury Board, reporting to the Chief Information Officer for the Government of Canada. I'm kind of AI policy nexus for a lot of work that's going on in many different federal departments and agencies. That probably sounds familiar to you. I'm really happy to be here. I've worked for the last 7 or 8 years on different files directly with provinces and territories. I know that the nature of Confederation makes things complicated, but it's actually our biggest strength because we have lots of different innovation going on at different levels of government, and the best thing we can do is sort of convene everyone and learn from each other. So I really do appreciate the opportunity. I'm going to take a few minutes just to talk about the things that we're working on and the things that we're worrying about, understanding that I can probably go off for about 2 hours on a lot of this stuff, but consider this sort of the beginning of a sort of a long discussion. I know several of you, but obviously not all of you, so I'm hoping to work closely with you in the future. So, what? As I guess one of the policymakers for AI, because my primary job is to write some rules that I'll tell you about in a few minutes. Why AI in government at all? And it gets down to, I have a quote up there from my minister. AI, we're not going to embark on this sort of work just to do it because it's fun and it's new and it's hype and there's some expectation that government keeps up. It's more than that. It's rooted in this idea that we need to provide better services to clients, and those services are pretty broad. They include the direct services that our clients or users interact with on a day-to-day basis, to our ability to deliver good public policy, well-informed public policy, and regulatory services as well, and then also just function as an engine that's efficient and effective for our client populations. So we're envisioning sort of AI sort of sprinkling everywhere, but only if it makes sense and only if it actually could demonstrably lead to a situation that's better than the status quo, a service that's better than the status quo. So we're doing lots of work currently right now in the federal government, and I wanted to sort of use this as a very, very basic framework. But it's the stuff that we're doing to help ourselves internally to the stuff that we're doing to help clients and everything in between. I'll throw out some examples. It's way too difficult to talk about all the AI projects going on in the federal government for 2 reasons. One, there are too many, and 2, we haven't actually defined an AI project because the purpose is not to do a project because it's an AI project. The purpose is to deliver a service, and whether there's AI baked into that, if it makes sense, great. But the first thing is some process automation of internal services. We have some great work going on at Veterans Affairs as an example to try to determine what documents are of corporate value, and that is a bit subjective. There's some legal definitions of what corporate value means, but we've been going through they've been going through a pretty extensive process with IBM to go through all of their documentation going back to, I think, 1960, and saying, is this of corporate value or is this not of corporate value, through a supervised process. And currently, it's the immediate objective is to move documents from one old information management tool to a new information management tool. But having that classification of like what is a transactional document versus what is something that's of core corporate value can obviously help us with faster access to information, automated access to information, lots of great things, but we need that training set, and we're using Veterans Affairs right now as a sort of guinea pig to see how that works. Obviously, that's not going to be directly transferable to every department immediately. Lots of departments deal with various types of data that won't be seen by another, but it's our first sort of foray into trying to figure out how we define corporate value for our data. We have lots of analytical tools currently for policy or for immediate operations. One really good example is at the Public Health Agency of Canada, where we use a variety of, there's some health records, but also social media data, real-time media data in about 60 languages, using a tool built by the National Research Council of Canada called the Global Public Health Intelligence Network. The system automatically detects whether or not an outbreak break is imminent. And we've experimented with it in 2016 with Zika. It worked quite well. We're now training it on foodborne illnesses, and they're very, very keen and very excited about this new tool. Automated decision support, I think, is in many federal public servants' mind the holy grail for artificial intelligence type or automated type projects. It's also the place where we face the greatest risk because of issues like biased decisions, and that's the ability to automate an immediate decision about an individual, so or a business, or etc. So that's something like an automated approval of a patent or an automated approval of a social service. The ability to deliver almost immediate services to a client is pretty incredible and powerful. If somebody thinks of a great business idea on a weekend and they can't file things right away, wouldn't it be great if they can get a lot started immediately? And we could classify risk around those services correctly, and for low risk things just sort of proceed. We've done some automated decision support work already at our Heritage Department, for example, and where we have various micro-grant programs to small communities. We have these processes now completely automated where, for example, the system determines sort of which small communities applying for a grant for a variety of purposes under $5,000 can be approved or not, and we continually retrain this algorithm. That was built by Lixar, which is an Ottawa-based firm. And then finally, chatbots, which I think a lot of service departments are really interested in exploring. We don't have active chatbots right now in the federal sphere that are really client-focused. Part of that is potentially a limitation of the technology, and also things that we grapple with around the accuracy of the information and whether or not, quite frankly, a chatbot will deliver a public service better than just having a good website. As an example, if a conversational user interface is really at all a necessary thing right now at this stage, eventually we're talking about things like delivering some government information and services through voice assistants that, like Amazon, Alexa, Google Home, etc. But in terms of like authenticated services that you have to apply for something and interact with using personal information, that's something quite new in that we don't necessarily understand how to do that through a chatbot if it's all desirable. But we're probably going to experiment in the near future. We're definitely going to experiment on our own internal people with chatbots for things like information management, answering policy questions, that sort of thing. One of the biggest questions in many federal departments is, what did my predecessors do about this problem if it existed before? And I don't know how it works in the Ontario government. In many federal departments, it's really hard to access that information just based on that question. So I'm regulating something, or I've been asked to regulate something. I think it's similar to regulating something else that we've done before, but what were a lot of the internal conversations that led to that? If the people moved on and there's no immediate corporate memory, how do I access that? So this is sort of governments have tremendous amounts of data, and a lot of that's unstructured. We need some of these tools to help us sort of sort, find, and understand what we have and how to make better policy decisions. That said, your automated tool that you develop, or we develop, is hurling its way towards a number of sort of important policy considerations, both internal and sort of external. And we have to be mindful that it will have impacts. And we're trying to develop ways to measure that sort of impact and to understand it and develop something called an algorithmic impact assessment, which has been proposed by a number of organizations around the world in order to, when you embark on a serious automation project, say, how is it going to affect some of these things? Will it affect it at all? And if so, how can I account for what those impacts might be, and what do I do about them? And are those impacts too high? So to respond to some of these issues, we're working on rules, and actually to respond to the desire and demand to deploy some of this technology, we're generally working on sort of rules, people-type projects, and tools. So for rules, right now, we're working on a binding Treasury board standard on automated decision support systems. That is available for everyone to look at today. And the purpose of that is to really focus on those systems that will have direct impact over immediate administrative decisions on people's lives. We We do lots of them. It's everything from approving a drug to that social service. It's very similar to what your level of government does as well, provide a lot of administrative decisions. And if you have a system informing that decision or actually fulfilling that decision at the end of the day on behalf of a ministerial power, what are those things you need to worry about? So we're developing these rules right now. It's really important that departments understand their ethical guidelines, that understand their objectives. And for us, the overall sort of under the line objective, as I call it, is to make sure that these systems earn and maintain Canadians' confidence in the public services. We lead to much smarter contracts with vendors and improve internal communication, because that one in particular is interesting. A lot of AI projects require maximal communication within and between departments, which we're not very good at in the government of Canada. So I, based on a lot of provincial governments, I've yet to meet a provincial government that really nails down internal collaboration perfectly, other than maybe the territories. So this will basically collide different people in different departments or within departments. So your data science group, which is often independent from your chief information officer who's handling your reference architecture, which is different than your HR, which is different than the actual business owner who's dealing with this social program on a day-to-day basis. They all need to be at the table, and they all need to talk to each other and understand each other and learn each other's language. In terms of people, the big question in the federal government is how do we recruit data scientists who are extra specialized when there are very few of them, and we can't nearly pay as much as the private sector. We can't recruit them as fast as the private sector. And how do we keep them interested? We're doing so in a way that we say you can work on incredible sort of wicked social problems and help us inform policy in a new way. That's a bit abstract, so we have to figure out a way other than the sort of call to patriotism. What are the other ways that we could recruit and retain people? Unfortunately, we have no answers. I know you probably came thinking there were answers. There are no answers to this question right now. We are experimenting with lots of skilling up our current staff already, and that includes introduction to data science or introduction to data management courses for different levels of staff in terms of their level of comfort and the amount that they work with this stuff on a day-to-day basis, thinking that everyone's going to need to work with, anyone who works in policy will need to work with data, if not now and then in a few years, as well as skilling up the executive cadre so that they know what they're talking about when they go into meetings with vendors or when they go into meetings with, when they go to conferences, that sort of thing. We're doing some intensive work there, testing out different models to see what's working. And then finally, labor relations. Everyone is concerned about the jobs question. I'm more concerned about quantifying impacts on specific tasks. It's almost guaranteed that some percentage of tasks that you do in government will be automated over the coming years. What that percentage is and what that magic number is where the job is no longer required is really difficult to hit. It's easy to say their jobs will be affected or jobs won't be affected. It's hard to say how much of your job will be affected, because it's just as important for an individual. If 40% of my tasks are automated, my job isn't cut, but it's fundamentally changed. How do we make it sure that it changes for the better? A lot of that is in automating internal processes so that, as I say, we could get down to the business of helping Canadians and rather than focusing on a lot of internal processes. But a lot of those internal processes are responding to the costs of democracy, and those are really important, things like access to information. We can't just say that that's a bureaucratic thing we're putting to the side and automating. It has to work really well, because otherwise the system isn't working really well. And then finally, tools. The build versus buy question is brought up all the time, and a lot of that AI introduces a new element to that, because it's not just a tactical decision, there's a whole social impact decision in that, is your program going to affect society? Will that potentially lead to litigation where you're going to need to expose algorithms? For us, where we've been doing automated decision work or even AI influencing policy, we're building a lot of those tools in-house because we don't have answers to all of this intellectual property stuff. And if we own it, if it's Canadian IP, then we can go to court and we can expose an algorithm to a court. And we're not worried that a company who provided us that algorithm or is providing us a service rather than giving us over an algorithm that they've built won't do so. especially if it's a foreign firm. So this way we have accountability, we're retaining accountability over a lot of the sensitive work. It's obviously doesn't make sense for all government projects because we simply don't have that capacity. But we have to figure out a way, and we're doing so right now, to say what's really high risk to society and that we're going to build and that we're going to have total exposure over versus what this information management tool, which we're getting IBM to do because it makes no sense for us to build this internally, and they can come in and do it really quickly. So the good thing also about a lot of this internal building, including from the National Research Council of Canada, is we can reuse and share, including with you. So a lot of the work that is being developed through data science teams throughout the federal government is shareable, and I mean, assuming that you have the necessary data to train these models again, and it makes sense for you to do so, but we can share a lot of this work. You know, for example, Health Canada is testing a neural network to read and understand contents of drug applications from pharmaceutical companies, which are in the multiple thousands of pages, in order to shorten the drug approval process. That basic research, in terms of like how do you read a drug application, might be useful to other science-based applications, such as agriculture, which may be directly applicable to your level of government. So as we develop these products, we're going to be using existing avenues to make sure that we can distribute the intellectual property across levels of government. So I think that's all I have right now. Thanks very much.